Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dairy Raid for a special edition of the Dairy Raid as I was able to sit down and have a chat with Jake Kocorowski, longtime member of the Badger Media, now running his own show at the Badger Observer, and had a chance to talk all things fall camp with the Badgers from the new culture that is taking shape in Madison to how the new coaches are fitting into the program, how the changes to the offense and defense are building this new program, and everything in between. So, without further ado, here's that conversation with Jake.
Okay, so I guess the first thing I want to ask is we've been hearing a lot about the new culture around Wisconsin football, the evolving culture of Wisconsin football. For someone who has been, at least with like the Luke Fickell era, you've been at the last two fall camps, you've seen spring ball, you've been around the players, the coaches. What is new? What has changed, or what can we feel like is changing that lead us to believe that a new culture is taking a hold?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, my good man. I know we've talked a lot over the years, so
Yeah.
it's great, finally, chatting more in detail. And really, it's just with this culture. I think you see players. It's really interesting. I know Colton Bartholomew from Badger Extra, my old teammate, had a great article up talking about some of the team bonding they've done with meetings they've had, like where the two players present. And I had talked, it's funny, I had the same interviews and I was around the same people when Colton was asking those questions. So I kind of got some insights from them too, when I was interviewing, when I was in the same kind of scrum. And so it's really interesting having them start this where they're introducing themselves and kind of presenting themselves. And so the players get to know each other a little bit better. I think that's part of it. I think that I think it's also a fact too with, this is year 3 of Luke Fickell, and you're seeing, the turnover on the roster compared to what was in, the previous regime underneath Paul Christ. And I'm not saying there was like a huge, clash of things by any stretch, but it's also just now that he's got his people in, more of his people in, the people that he's recruited, and, others like Riley Ballman and Jackson Aker are still around for that matter too. So it's not like they've gone anywhere. Ben Barton's a 2020 kid, and he's kind of almost like, he's one of Paul Christ's 5 offensive line recruits in that 2020 class. Now he's a defensive lineman. When he transitioned, I think it was back in 21, and he's kind of like a leader within this group too. So I think there's players are buying in, and you see too. It's I think just maybe with the culture, I think it's just going maybe it's partly going back to that run emphasis game in terms of the offense where you have this wide zone scheme underneath Jeff Grimes, and there's this physicality involved with the offensive line. I'm not saying they weren't as physical underneath Phil Longo and past 2 years, but I do think that having this, they've run the ball pretty well, I feel. And within that, even the culture, that there's this physical mentality of imposing your will on opponents. And I think that may play a role on the offensive side, but I really feel that with, I think the team, it's always interesting because we always thought, and I said this before on Sirius XM earlier today, that, we kind of thought, at least I did, where the house that Chris built in that sense was, oh, well, you don't need to do too much. You just need to, okay, maybe take it down to the foundation's there. Just put up some new drywall, right? Get some new insulation. It's taken a little bit more than that, and they've had to kind of demo a few things, and that was one thing that they tried to put on an addition per se with the Phil Longo air raid that needed to be demolished and rebuilt in the way of what Jeff Grimes is trying to do. So those are some of the things, but you can tell that this team, I feel that, and it's always players speak too about how they're close they are, but even Braden Locke had said years ago about how Wisconsin's locker room is special basically, and like it's different, and so I think that's still there and whatnot too. But yeah, I think what the changes that Luke Fickell did this season, this off season, with hiring Jeff Grimes and then also refreshing the defensive front, both at outside linebacker and defensive line, also play a role in that too, kind of reestablish that identity.
Yeah, so it's not so much because we've been hearing this culture where it's not so much like a total rebuild. It's just taking 2 steps back to go a step forward kind of thing. Like you've got the old school Wisconsin mentality, but with modern football. Because I've been watching as much Grimes stuff as I can. We'll watch all the clips coming out of camp, and it's not like they've gone back to the Christ offense, the Christ era. It's just the mentality. Like the offense is fresh, it's modern, it's got that new school spin on an old school attitude. And I think that's what Wisconsin needed all along. And it's always what I thought. Like I've been saying it, like I think Grimes would have been the perfect guy coming out for Luke Fickell instead of Phil Longo. It might have been too big of a step to go that complete polar direction.
Right.
But it definitely a good thing it sounds like is that this, again, we're going back to that culture world. It's a player driven thing. Like the coaches, they bring the system and stuff like that, but the players are the ones really leading. And it's nice to hear that it's even some of the old school, the guys who've been in the program the longest are leading the charge.
Yeah. And you have, like Jake Renfro's been with Luke Fickell since he was, a freshman at Cincinnati, right? And so you have guys like Renfro, Riley Mallman, like I mentioned before, taking on a leadership role on the offensive line and in offense. AJ Blazik had said a couple days ago. I also think it's, like I said, Ben Barton, someone along those lines that's that I feel is a leader within the defense. And you have these, like I said, it's player driven, but especially with this offense, you have. It's interesting because during that Chris type of offense, you had guys that, are fans that said, hey, we want more passing. And then they go to the air raid and then people go, and Phil Longo was adamant. Like, I don't want to, I've had 1,000-yard rushers with where I've been previously, and I don't want to go away from that, but then people are now clamoring, oh, we need to go back to the, back to the run game. Well, it's kind of the fickle nature, pun intended, of fans sometimes where, but it's also, that is kind of ingrained in Wisconsin's mentality since Barry Alvarez has been coach, is this tough power running game and whatnot. And now, Jeff Grimes is known for his wide zone emphasis. And, we've seen variations. It's an NFL style offense that has been seen, with the Sean McVays and the Matt LaFleurs and the Kyle Shanahans, it's that new age generation type of Mike McDaniels. I know they're all part of that similar coaching tree, but they do things each a little different. And I'm wondering, I guess my question I need to ask Jeff is just, okay, which type are you? Are you Sean McVay? Are you more LaFleur? Are you more like this in your eyes? And and it's for me though, it's, what's good about it is that Wisconsin's also been known to have, to bring up guys and develop them for the NFL. And I think that type of offense being as popular as it is, I think it's going to help offensive players as well. And I think it's going to be big and, what's been asked and whatnot. But I also, it's up on Instagram on my Badger Observer at Instagram. Ben Barton tries talking about how he has to like his discipline and how he has to stay disciplined within the run game, where right now he's not focused on maybe someone doing a fly sweep or a jet sweep, but his eyes are on the running back for his defensive line, but he has to stay disciplined and he can't have hungry eyes or else, he paraphrased it, but it was the, see a little, see a lot, but see a lot, see nothing. And that, and that basically just means you can't be everywhere or else you're going to miss stuff. You have to focus in on the smaller details, and that's when you can see what's going on. So he has to focus in on the running back that way. So I think it's been good that way for Wisconsin, and I still think Phil Longo's a good coach. That's the interesting part of it too. I think it just wasn't a good fit, and the hire of Jack Bicknell Jr. I don't think was necessarily the best. And all luck. I mean, Jack was always great talking to us, so best of luck to him in West Virginia. Now back with Rich Rod, but this is a very interesting, I think, I think it's going to be an intriguing offense. I think it's going to give Wisconsin a chance to do more and have more chances to win this season. And the question is going to be just how much can they actually do so against this formidable schedule.
Yeah, and it always, thinking back to the great Wisconsin offenses of old, like how they got beat was teams could out athlete them, where they could just, if you were bigger and stronger or you're more athletic, the scheme didn't force you to play the entire field. What I love about Grimes' offense is you have to play assignment football. You have to defend the entire field, and you have to be disciplined, because with the wide zone, if your linebackers get antsy, 1 foot in the ground, and our running back is to the end zone before the linebacker realizes he outran him. And it's funny. It's what it was our most successful blocking scheme last year, but the mentality is a little bit different now. There's a little less patience. It's a little more, a more violent form of the wide zone. So I'm really, really looking forward to that.
And you're
in
seeing
combination
that
with the passing game.
And you're seeing that during practice. Now, I mean, they're not saying the defense is just getting bowled over. They're not. I mean, EJ Whitlow, we're talking on a Wednesday. We talked to him, or Thursday for you, my good man, overseas. Yeah. But you're looking at you're talking to him. I mean, he feels they got 6, 7, 8 defensive linemen deep. That's much more than what they had towards the end of last season, where they're giving up 200 yards per game the final 5 games. But I will say, yeah. You only there were 3 players according to Pro Football Focus that had 300, 400 snaps and whatnot. Now, they can really sink in. So I think they have made plays, but I do like what the first team offensive line has done in the run game. I think they're still, with pass blocking, I think there's still some things that they can clean up going forward. I also think Wisconsin's improved on the edge too. But we also thought that about John Pius and Leon Lowry. So don't mind. I feel like I'm going off on tangents, but back to your point about the violence of it. I think one thing too is that, they talk, Grimes talked about this, or was it Grimes or no? Colton had that story back on Badger Extra talking about them going away from the clap. It's a cadence now. Yeah. I think that also allows more of a head start, because if you do this clap, well, then, and depending on that, the defense can read up on stuff. And if you have a good staff that can time up certain things and see tendencies, well, that could help. But now that you have a cadence, that can help. And I think that they're getting off the ball quicker. I also feel that, that's another year of experience. Jake Renfro comes back for a 6th year. Ryan Mallman's in his 5th year now. Joe Brunner's now his 2nd year as a starter. We'll see what happens at left tackle with Kevin Haywood's injury and, Davis Hines in there. But, they're getting blocks, and we're seeing nice runs by Dylan Jones and Darion Dupree today. And Darion Dupree's, I think, had a really good last few days of practice, and for that matter. And that can only help for Wisconsin. You're seeing Jackson Aker being used in a fullback-like fashion, but he's also being used as a tight end, a smaller tight end. That's like a H-back type of look. So, there are pieces there that you have to like, and it's hard because, right, you see these plays and you're kind of just like, all right, well, they're having some success, but what's it going to be like? Not really necessarily against Miami, Ohio, or Middle Tennessee State, but what's going to look like against Tuscaloosa on September 13th. But so that's what I'm looking for. But can they assert themselves in that regard? And I think this offense, also gives them a chance where you're not rushing and you're going to gas out your defense after 90 seconds to 2 minutes, for a drive. They can have more extension. They can run the play clock more, and they can always run tempo if they want to. But it also gives them a chance where they can assert themselves more, especially in the run game.
Yeah, and it'll be curious to see. It's more, how do I put it? Really slowing things down to reassert control over the clock, which is different. But when you have an offense that's a little more dynamic, you're not going to get in situations where first down, get stuff, second down, get stuff. Now you're 3rd and 10 and you've done nothing, and yet you've wasted tons of time. And when you play against offenses who, the Oregons and the Penn States and Ohio State who play with tempo, you really run out of time. But the great thing about the Grimes system is it's big play. It is a grind the clock, but it's also a 1 foot in the ground, the play and the ball's gone.
Right.
So that's going to be an interesting dichotomy. And I'm trying not to, the last 2 years we've been burned with positive expectations. We were so excited going into 23, tempered excitement last year, but still excited. And now it's year 3. We're hearing good things in camp, like we always kind of do.
Right.
But at least, I don't know, from what I've been gathering, reading the camp reports and listening to the camp reports, maybe the upper echelon is not as high, or the upper reaches of camp is not as high, but outside of a couple, the left tackle spot, we're not hearing as much like this guy had a really bad day. This unit had a really bad day. It's a lot of, we're looking pretty good. Now that you've been there for several these practices in a row, am I wrong? Is there more consistency this year than there was last year, or is it just kind of the ebbs and flows are a little more even than last year?
I think it could be a little bit of both on that. And I think so. Last year, at this time, Tyler Van Dyke and Braden Locke were still getting 1 reps, right? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, so there was a, like, it's hard to bring in a transfer and then say, oh, you're going to compete, but then you're going to compete with this guy. But we all kind of know, like, well, why are you bringing in like, what are you telling this transfer in that regard? But it is, Tyler Van Dyke, if he's not injured in Alabama, I think Wisconsin has a better year. I think we're not talking about a bowl, missing out on the bowl for the first time in 20 some odd years. But I do feel with this, what's going on, there is a clear cut starter. There always has been since the start of camp, with a spring ball for that matter, with Billy Edwards Jr. And he's a leader. He's asserted himself well as a leader. He's the type of quarterback that Jeff Grimes wants in this type of offense, where bigger guys, about 6'3", 228 listed on the depth chart, looks at, had a full summer that was healthy and able to work with Brady Collins, the director of football strength and conditioning at Wisconsin. So you have that. So you have that veteran presence at quarterback, who he's, like, in terms of being prototype, he's big, but he's also athletic. He can throw, but he also has a little bit of wiggle in the pocket and can move about and maneuver in the pocket, which, maybe wasn't the case towards the end of last year for sure. But you also have guys that, like I said, the experience is there. And yeah, even right guard there, I think Emerson Mendel has gotten more first team reps in the last couple of practices at least. I mean, he's been the first team right guard the last couple of practices. And I think, I feel that he has the most upside out of that group. We'll see what Kerry Kadenko or JP Benchwall or even Colin Cubberly, what could do there. But I think there's enough stability on that offensive line with 3 experienced offensive line starters. You have Vinny Anthony, who, is a leader too, and has also got speed. Talk about that downfield type of thing, throwing, like, you can set up that play action off that run. And you have 2 receivers like in Jaden Ballard and Vinny Anthony that run 4.4s. If they can get separation, that's a really good sign there. And Billy Edwards has the arm strength and the arm talent to air it out and hit them in stride. We saw that. I think tight end could be another one of those questions where, I went going in, but I like what I've seen out of Lance Mason, the transfer from Missouri State. I like what Tucker Ashcraft has done. I like what Jackson Aker is doing and how they're using them. And that in the running back group, for that matter, talking to Luke Fickle, it was a couple of days ago, was just praising about like how he, how he feels the group, the first, week or so was, I think he said something along the lines of them being like among the best position groups that he had there in the first, week. So you have I think there's less ebb and flows, but I also think the talent that's there is helping them create more consistency in that area. And, and there's still, it's not perfect. Billy Edwards had, a few days ago, 2-3 days ago, I think it was 3 days ago, had a couple of red zone picks, one in Skelly, one in teamwork. That they weren't great. You don't want that. But he also had a day where, at the same time, he had 2 touchdown passes in the red zone to tight ends. And then, he had a nice touchdown to Vinny Anthony. So, there is, you're seeing this offense create problems for the defense, and it's good for the defense because, they're not, you're not seeing the same thing repeatedly, and you have to now, like you mentioned, defend the entire field. So if that's the case, yeah, you may see similar plays repeatedly, for the defense. So they probably read up a little bit better out of different looks and whatnot, but it's only going to help them, when they face other teams that have these type of multiple type of looks.
For sure. I mean, at this time, I think people, when they hear about throwing picks in practice or stuff like that, people got to remember they're not game planning right now. They're installing. And not only are they installing, but the defense is seeing the same, like, run it again, run that again. Let's do it again. Okay, this is now the 4th time we run this play in the last 10 minutes. They know what's going to happen. So those kind of things I don't necessarily worry about. It's when we hear it seems like this guy's struggling picking it up, or this guy had to be taken over to the side and is working with the position coach. He's not getting it. That's where you want to worry. But I think, if you try to throw a ball in a window on the same route that you've thrown 6 times in the last 10 plays and it gets picked off, we don't need to worry about that kind of as much. Kind of the one thing I was going to ask, though, is, like, we have so many new coaches this year, all these assistant position coaches. We have Jeff Grimes with all these new faces on the coaching staff. Now that, and you've been at these practices and you've seen all these extra coaches compared to last year. How has the practice dynamic changed? Like, during individual time, is Jeff Grimes just he doesn't have a position group? Is he just wandering through the groups? Is he kind of sticking more towards the offensive line because that's who he is, but they have 3 coaches? Like, how does all these assistants, how do you see the dynamics working in practice? Because I'm always fascinated with that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Reed, one you're talking about Jordan Reed. I mean, he, and Kenny Guyton moves over quarterbacks, right? So there's a different dynamic there. They're working on the side. They're going through drills for quarterbacks while they're doing a special teams period. Like to start practice, you're seeing guys like that. They're working on the side. On the sideline throwing balls and working on their drops and whatnot. You're seeing, Jordan Reed's doing his work, who I think really is a home run type of hire. I think with what he did and what he's done on the recruiting trail, along with just how, what's being asked to him with this wide receiver group with, you have Vinny Anthony returning, but he's the one that's really has the only production. There's, Chris Brooks hasn't really been able to prove himself. Jaden Ballard from Ohio State. Yeah, he was part of a great wide receiver rooms, but he never actually, he only had 11 career catches coming into this season. And then you have younger talent like Eugene Hilton Jr., Kyan Barry Johnson, others. You also have Tretch, who, he hasn't really established himself yet. So I think you're seeing those guys do drills and they're working through stuff there. With Grimes, one thing that was interesting is that AJ Blazik loves it when Grimes comes over during practice, and when I was down in the field a couple days ago, 2-3 days ago, saw Grimes working with the tackles and trying to, work on particular blocking there. And he'll go over there and, you see those guys, you see him and, Luke Fickell around the field, Scott Power, I've seen him work with the defensive backs, and whatnot. He came over from Western Michigan as well. So you see that in Tuff Borland. You talk about an assistant inside linebackers coach, he's helping run drills alongside Mike Trissel and, and whatnot. So you see those guys, and that's big, even with the tight end groups. You have obviously Joe Ludwig, who's the son of Andy Ludwig, former Wisconsin offensive coordinator / Utah offensive coordinator. But you have these, the assistants really do help, and it does make a huge deal where they're able to focus in more and help. Because Mike Tressel is a defensive coordinator too, so it's you have a position, and a lot of those D coordinators have position groups, but it's good having that assistant there. if needed. And we already seen like what Tough Borland can do also on the recruiting trail when he's sent out. So, but yeah, that's just kind of the glimpse there. And then you have like Luke just looking Luke Fickle just looking all over the field and whatnot. You see him, when they're running kind of modified team drills, talking and whatnot too. So, but even like Casey Robach, and Zach Keemans, Zach Keemans a graduate assistant, and we all know Casey Robach. It's really interesting. For that diving into that, AJ Blas, like it said, like they could have 4 coaches coaching the offensive line at one time, and that he's like he called it out. He's like just how it can be so beneficial to develop offensive linemen. So. I think that's huge. It's just very interesting. It's also very interesting just watching the entire operation run because you have the student managers, you have the equipment managers, and just trying to work and help out too. It's quite the operation to be run,
Definitely a lot of moving parts. And it's great to, I got to imagine for Mike Trussell and for Coach Grimes, the ability to kind of sit back and kind of see the overall picture instead of, okay, you have, like last year, Phil Longo, he's the offensive coordinator, but he's also the quarterback coach. So he needs to have his focus in one area during practice. And so he can't really, part of his overall job is to know the offense as a whole, at least with Coach Grimes not having a position. Yeah, of course, he's got his emphasis with the offensive line, but he also, if he wants to, he can go watch the wide receivers. He can go watch the quarterbacks. And that's got to be refreshing. And that's actually one of the nice things I have, like for me this season. I don't have a position to coach. I love it. I just walk around. I just walk around every group and just kind of couple words here and there, all this kind of things. And it's amazing how much more you can see by just looking. And that's a dumb way to put it. But when you don't have to focus on one thing, it really helps you see the big picture.
Nice.
Yeah. And so that actually kind of leads me to the next question is, how is Grimes at practice? Like you see a lot of the behind the scenes stuff with Phil Longo last year. He seemed very laid back, very almost quiet, and just kind of go with the flow kind of guy. Grimes seems to be, he's a big guy, former offensive lineman type. He's got this presence to him, big booming voice. How is he on the field?
Yeah, and I haven't paid too much attention like during 11-on-11 periods when we're in the press box. So that's one thing I can take a look for you, and I can also that'll be probably one of my takeaways and just how the coaches are on the field, because you see whenever there's big applause, you see the play, the coaches overall, like AJ Blasek had a good block. I think it was like Logan Powell he's a freshman center getting a good block, and you see Blazek's voice raise up, and you're like, oh, that's hey, and
yeah.
So AJ's got that raspy voice to him, which I love about him. But he, with Grimes though, he's directing, and I think he's pretty blunt, but it's also you see the respect like the linemen have for him, because he's one of them. He played at Vonsick and UTEP, right? So you have a player like that, someone like that's a former player, and I think he commands the respect, and you're seeing this offense. I'm guessing, I'm speculating here, but I'm guessing the players are seeing just what they're able to do within this offense compared to the offense prior, and I think that's going to be an interesting thing going forward with Wisconsin, and just what they plan on doing, with game planning and whatnot. But yeah, I haven't seen anything where anyone's been out of hand or anything like that, or had any disagreements or anything with, or any type of showing any discontent or anything. I think everyone's like locked in, and they're rolling, and they're listening to what he's saying.
It definitely seems like with the schemes this year, both offensively and defensively, especially last year, it seemed like the idea was you ran the offense, and if you execute it correctly, those who should be open are going to get open. Those who are going to make plays will make plays. It's never designed for a particular person. This year, it's definitely seems like with a more pro style offenses, you're actively trying to scheme people open. You're actively trying to get people involved based on their ability. Has there been any? Can you see that emphasis in practice? Like they're really trying to find different ways to get Tretch the ball. They're really trying to find ways to maybe have a little more variety with a certain player in mind. And so we're getting away from kind of last year was like everyone find your spot and the quarterback will find you. Now it's like we're going to design to get the ball to you.
Right. I mean, I think you can see it in just what they're trying to do with like the wide receivers and the running backs. And I think they talk about defending the whole field. I think that's what's part of it. I don't know how many times where I was wondering why they weren't running fly sweeps or trying to defend the field like last year, which I know it's probably not part of that offense, right? But you're also just, and it's something that we saw with the Paul Christ offense, right? Where, those jet sweeps were kind of staples of, keeping the defense honest, where they could run, run plays off of it where, okay, well, it's going to go, could go between the tackles, or you're going to see David Gilreath go 85 yards. And I think that's huge for Wisconsin and what they're trying to do. And I think that's part of the scheming. So that, you have to defend, like I said, you're like Ben Barton said, you have to stay disciplined. And you can't think the whole picture in this regard, or else you're going to lose the details, and then you're going to, end up probably getting pancaked. And he said, like, that is not the goal. It was his exact word. It was verbatim, near verbatim words. But you have also, there are certain places and by the way, just letting everyone know too, in Wisconsin doesn't want us talking about scheme and whatnot too. Right. So let everybody know I can't dive into the exact personnel or what they're doing, but I will say, there's a couple plays where, there's Lance Mason made a nice catch where he was wide open, and you're like, oh, that's a nice play. You're seeing the receivers. It's not just the running backs getting the ball on running plays. And so I think that is a huge key in terms of the scheme, where you're going to it's going to force defenses to, all right, break out the film and here's how it's going to go. It keeps you off guard more than what it was last year. And I think that's going to be a huge benefit for Wisconsin.
Yeah, it really noticed that it's definitely almost borrowing a phrase from the air raid, getting athletes in space, especially with the receiver group. They're really finding, and again, you guys can't say anything what you see, but even the little clips and stuff that we see online, like I saw, it was Carter Smith's dad posted a little clip of Carter doing a drill. And I'm like, oh, I can see what that's setting up. And he's just a little shovel pass to Grover Bortolotti. He's like, but you can see the footwork. So, all right, the receiver's going to get involved with that one as well on a little. It's not just the jazz sweep getting the receivers in the run game. So that's something I actually find really refreshing, is like, we're going to get more people involved, but it's not going to be, again, it's the old school Wisconsin mentality with this new school type of offense.
Right. Yeah, you hit it right on the head, man. I think then that's what makes it intriguing. And I know that, it's hard, right? Because you, like, with this schedule, they have to play Phil Parker's Iowa. They got to face Alabama with their talent. They got to, that Murderer's Row stretch that starts in October at Michigan and goes and ends at Oregon. That's tough, man. You also got Indiana on the road, which we'll see how they fare. I like the quarterback pickup there, but defensively, we'll see what they can do. And then you also have Illinois, which, I know it's everyone's kind of like a dark horse pick for, the college football playoff potentially, but Wisconsin gets them at home at least in that regard. And then you also have like other teams like Washington, where I feel Washington may be up on the upswing with Jed Fish, so it's going to be a tough schedule, but like I said, this offense and just what they're trying to do, I really feel that it's going to give them better chances to win, especially those toss-up games, which there could be a lot of toss-up. We don't know. Yeah, Iowa's got Logan Jones at center, and he's one of the freaks on Bruce Feldman's freak list, as deserved. But what's going to happen at running back? What's going to happen at quarterback with Mark Gronowski, and how is he going to fit for Wisconsin against Wisconsin or against other teams going up from South Dakota State? and the defense should be good, but I also think Wisconsin could might have an opportunity to help wear them down further than what you saw in Iowa City last year where they got blown out. So it's very I think this offense gives them a better chance. I think what they also done on defense too. I think Wisconsin's in a better shape, and I think they're in a better structure to go forward, especially this season and in future years. But we'll see. It's very much though, we can talk about just what these smaller things, but it's really now, and we coined it on the Badger Extra podcast before I was no longer part of the State Journal, but especially for the defense, it's a prove it year. Yeah, it's a prove it defense. And you can say the same thing for the offense too, in terms of, okay, you guys are looking good in practice running the ball. Do it against someone against another jersey,
And speaking of the defense, I saw the media availability with EJ Whitlow talking about he's 7-8 guys deep, and we're hearing a lot more guys in the linebacker group. And it seems like our great Badger defenses of the past, they were always kind of headlined by stud linebacker, stud edge rusher. Can't talk. DB, there was the guy or the couple guys. This team doesn't seem like there might be some budding stars. Mason Reiger is definitely one that everyone's been talking about, but it really seems like this year could almost be a defense by committee. Like there could be almost like, I heard it on, I can't remember what podcast I heard on, but talking about almost like line shifts in hockey, like line changes. When you're seeing it in practice, is that kind of just a lot of different, again, without getting too far into the scheme, are we just seeing lots of different groupings, a lot of different people getting involved, or is it just maybe a product of its camp and we're still trying to figure guys out? Or are there players more, it seems like more players are getting involved that could actually contribute than maybe in years past?
Yeah. EJ Whitlow said it, saying he's like, you guys have seen the number of combinations I've put out on the line. And he says he says right now he feels between 6 to 8 players could, he said 6, 7, 8 players could be ready, he feels could be ready, to contribute really. And so I think that's a huge statement, like we discussed earlier. So I think you're seeing combinations of guys going in, and even like at second team reps, Nolan Vills and Jamel Howard Jr. are both performing pretty well, and whatnot. Then you're also seeing, like I said, you have the defensive line rotation in, and then the outside linebackers are really interesting where, Corey Walker's coming back. Luke Fickle talked about like a lower back type of thing. So you didn't really see him too much during the first week. Now he's starting to, he's getting first and second team reps, I think, based off my notes today. So he's a heavier 290. He was nearly 300 in the spring. He is about 290. He was listed on the fall camp roster. So he's he's lines up on the edge, but you call him a defensive end, really, and whatnot, but he's still he's on the line. Daryl Peterson's up to 260s, but you have like different combinations of those guys. Mason Reiger, Sebastian Cheeks, have provided the most pressure, I would say, against the first team line on that end. Cheeks has that speed that makes it hard for, not just Wisconsin's tackles, but it should be harder for other Big Ten tackles to contain you, at least you hope, if you're a Wisconsin fan. But you're also seeing guys like Tyrese Fearbry come in, the Kentucky transfer. And, I talked about it. When was it? I talked maybe a day or two ago on my observations. Like he had, between a couple of days, he had like 3 sacks. They were all against the second team offensive line, but he was still getting back there. And I think, there's talent there. There's Nick Clayton, who, Brady Collins was talking lovingly and glowingly about him during Squad Fest, about how he ran like a 4.59 at over 230 pounds, which is, huge for, insane. And I think he's still another year away from like maturing further, but I do feel that Clayton could provide a presence there as well. Aaron Witt probably has a role somewhere, and he has a role on this defense. He had a couple of sacks. Granted, he was untouched today on both those occasions, but he had a couple of sacks today. And so you have this big buildup of guys. I'm not even talking about like the Ernest Willers or the Michael Gardners or whatnot. So for me, I think that's a really good sign for Wisconsin, where they realized they needed to load up on the defensive front, and they did it at two key positions. And I will say, there's Ricardo Hallman, who is probably looking to return back to All-American form like he did in 2023. Who they need to figure out at cornerback opposite him, with the Nazir Forkurian situation still murky. Emilio Agard's gotten some first team reps. I know him and Deani Hill were going back and forth, but I think I've seen, Agard's gotten a lot of first team reps, earlier today. But, you're also trying to figure out who's going to back up Hallman right now. And, you're seeing a true freshman, Kairos Gaines, who was a late addition to the class, a late flip from, I think it was Miami of Ohio, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
He's stepped up, and he's a freshman. He's got some things to clean up. It's stuff that's hard for me because I'm not necessarily an X's and O's guy, but but he doesn't look scared. He's taking advantage of those reps when he can. And safety wise, Austin Braun was also named to the freaks list, and him and Preston Zachman, I think those two guys are the senior leadership too, and guys that have been here for a while. Zachman's a 6th-year guy. And he's, former like Brown and others like Malman and Aker and Hallman are Christ recruits. And now that, they've stepped up. And so I think, if Forkurian somehow gets eligibility down the road, that, and he returns, but if he has can return to form and have fresh legs, etc. I mean, you're looking at a secondary that could be really veteran led. And I also love Jameer Latimer II at slot. I think he's a perfect slot nickel back for what Wisconsin's trying to do, both in the pass rushing for that matter, but also defending against the pass through the air. So, but I do feel like right now there's no one that's really, you have Tackett Curtis and Christian Allegro, and I think both those inside linebackers have huge years, and with their athleticism and what this defense is trying to do. There's really not one person, maybe outside of Hallman, who has previous All-American honors, that really stands out.
It's good we're hearing so many different guys, because I think we got part of the defensive struggles last year, where it almost seemed like, regardless of the offense that we played against, they just put out their best 11, because if they put out guys who might be, defensive linemen who might be, we need to put more bodies on the line against Iowa, for example. But skill wise, that you were going to lose something. And so that's why maybe there was a little more matchup problems, because we were playing solely on, we got to put our best guys on the field. Now it seems like, at least, and we saw it in the spring, and they were running so many different personnel groupings and fronts, and they're lining up differently against the same formation and stuff. Like, it really seems like Tressel is digging a lot deeper into his bag of tricks, maybe bringing in a little bit more of what he wanted to do, getting away from the idea of them melding the elites and just running the Jim Leonard defense the first 2 years. Now it's a little bit more what they want to do, and hopefully that's going to help them kind of balance things out a little bit, to where the 11 guys that our top guys were good against the speed teams, but struggle against the power teams. And now I think maybe we got a chance to be a little more balanced, because we have more guys who can actually contribute.
I mean, I remember Ben Barton talking about it during local media day last week about just, he's 300 plus, I think he's listed at 325 right now, but you have, Elijah Hills, who's like maybe 285, in the interior. And then, all these, he's strong, and he was, you could say arguably Hills was their best defensive lineman. I think he was.
Yeah.
But he's also 285 going against an interior Big Ten defensive lineman. And you don't have a James Thompson Jr. who had the length and the athleticism last year. Kurt Neal didn't provide that either, and whatnot. So it's, I think with Wisconsin, like with what they're trying to do with that defensive front. Like I said, Parker Peterson's a huge guy, 6'4", 314. JVR Suggs is hovering around 300. Jamel Howard, obviously he's like 310-ish, I think. In all these, I think I listed it on the, gosh, it was, I looked at the roster for the defensive linemen. And I'm not saying all of them are going to play, but there are 8 defensive linemen that weigh 300 or around 300 or more pounds. Or it might be even 9 if you include Suggs, who's like 299. So they've gotten beefier up there, but it's also length. Like Peterson is lengthy. Barton has some length on him too. You have guys, and then like I said, Corey. You pair that with Corey Walker. He's out 6'5", 290-ish too. There's length on there and athleticism, and I saw Corey Walker making a really nice play on an outside run today where he almost ran down the guy. So there's a little bit of speed on his end too. So it's for me, I think Wisconsin's done a really good job where they addressed a key need. And I mean, that's the big thing that Mike Trussell talked about, like when he was asked, like, what do you think is going to be, the most improved thing for your defense? And he said stopping the run. And it's not even, I'm guessing he's not hoping he's betting on it, because that was the calling card for a Jim Leonard type of defense. Throughout his time was, the one bad year was 2018. You remember that year? Caden Lyles had to move over and transition from line to the defensive line, from the O-line to D-line. And, you lose Alec James, Connor Sheehy, and Chikwe Obashi from that 17 line. Yeah. And they, Matt, you saw the emergence of Matt Henningsen and Olivier Sagapolo, but, they're still, that's how critical having an experienced, a good defensive line is. And they also, on top of that, you talk about experience, those guys like JVR Suggs going in the 7th year, Parker Peterson's up there, too. Mason Reiger, again, experienced name. Corey Walker, I think he's a redshirt senior or, 5th year player, and whatnot. So there's also experience there. When you combine that with also like Charles Perkins, who's a redshirt junior right now, that stands out with his twitchiness and his abilities there. Dylan Johnson, who's a sophomore, who, over 310 pounds himself. So, I think they've done a good job addressing it. But again, now it's just prove it. We see this what they've done in practice. All right, let's see what you guys do against Bama on September 13th too.
Now that will be interesting to say the least. I think a lot of the guys you just mentioned there are new players coming into the system for the first time, coming into Wisconsin for the first time. There has been so much roster turnover in the last couple of years, partly because that's college football these days, it's just what it's going to be. And a lot of people have been talking about the negative side of the roster turnovers. Like, who do we have? We don't know anybody. It's a new team. It's going to be a new team every year. But when you have a lot of turnover, there are actually guys who can benefit, because all of a sudden I was the 6th string corner and now I'm 4 or 5 steps above. Have you seen anybody maybe from the spring into the fall now that you think have benefited from maybe guys who were on the roster last season, that maybe the roster turnover or maybe just the new makeup of the team has either taken advantage of the new opportunity or are benefiting from the new opportunity?
I think one could be Garrison Soliday, even though like you have Tackett Curtis, and I know, and he started his career as a walk-on, right? Christian Allegro didn't do 11-on-11 team periods today. So you saw Thomas Heiberger, and maybe he's also in this regard too, because he switched over to inside linebacker from outside. But him and Garrison Soliday were interchangeably working first team reps opposite Tackett Curtis. So you have Jaheim Thomas leave, you have Jake Chaney leave. They depart for their NFL, they exhaust their eligibility, and you have Tackett Curtis, you have Christian Allegro, who I think will be the first day starters. I'm not saying they are starters right now, but they have gotten the majority of the first up reps when healthy. But I think Soliday, someone that's always just been consistent as a walk-on, and now he's getting a little bit of shine there. At least today, they're looking for a I feel they have 3 really good inside linebackers with Curtis Allegro and then Antaron Turner, who's the FCS transfer from Western Carolina. I think, they have 3. You talk about Heiberger. I think Heiberger has that opportunity too, where he fits that. He is the same type of frame as Christian Allegro, just not as heavy right now, about 10 pounds lighter on the fall camp roster. So I think that position really, and even, they're going to have to compete against someone like a Cooper Catalano who's gotten second team reps, and Cooper's really done a good job. And he's beefed up considerably from, he was big in Germantown, but he's even bigger now. So I think that position group there, I think is what stands out. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else really because safety is not really the case because he brought in 2 transfers. Cornerback. I think the one thing would be, even just an A-guard for that matter with, Xavier Lucas and now Miami, which obviously is still there. That situation. You have Nazir Forkurine, who also, his situation's murky. And so I think A-guard has come in and, he's working at that boundary corner spot opposite Hallman. And so I think that's another name to watch there. Chris Brooks Jr. may be the other one who's, on the receiver end for offense, who, when he's healthy, he's a physical guy. He has good hands and, he can provide a presence, blocking and also catching the ball. So I think that's someone too to watch. But yeah, I would say even like, it's hard to even say with running back because Dylan Jones and Darian Dupree, Tyree Walker, we all thought he exhausted his eligibility until the JUCO ruling, and now he's at Cincinnati. But maybe that's someone like a Cade Yakameli, who I think that running back group, you have 3 starting caliber type of players, and if Dylan Jones mostly getting the first up reps with the first team, and then when he's getting 11 on 11 reps, but then it's Dupree and Yakameli that have been getting those interchangeably working with the first team offense too, and when you're one of your one of the fastest players on the team, Brady Collins told me Yakameli ran a 4.4, and then he's, maybe the, 2A or 2B running back behind Jones, possibly. But even though he'll get first team reps, but there are times where like in fall camp where you see him like getting reps after Dupree with the first team, that's saying something. So
yeah,
with that offense. So, but yeah, I think there are some players that have benefited that way.
For sure. Well, one thing I was going to ask too is like, you were at spring ball, now you're at fall camp. Has there been anybody that you've seen that maybe in spring ball weren't, catching your eye, but now we're in fall camp? Like, who was that? Oh, it's so-and-so, that guy. Wow, that's a big play. Haven't heard his name in a while. Or somebody who maybe just did, wasn't asserting their presence in spring ball, but all of a sudden now that we're in fall camp, are kind of making themselves known.
Yeah, I think Brandon Lane may fit that, the defensive lineman. He may be part of the 6 to 8 that get reps during the season at defensive lineman. He got reps last year, but he played in 8 games and had like 4 tackles. He wasn't a presence, right? He didn't have the snap counts compared to the others. But saw him today. I saw him like kind of pointed out because Colton and Jim Polzine, we sit together in the press box, and I'm looking around and I'm like, is that Brandon Lane getting first team reps? And he's like, yeah. And, he was getting first team reps, and, I saw part of his thing, kind of the part of it during the spring, not all of it, but I didn't really see him ever get first team reps in the spring. Now I missed some time because I got laid off and, whatnot, but I came back to, basically start what I'm starting now. But but getting first team reps, he had a nice pressure in the backfield today against the first team offensive line. And EJ Whitlow's talked and praised about how, there's more confidence in him. He's, and you're seeing that. And so he's been aggressive, and that's what they want out of their defensive linemen. So I think that's someone that stands out right there. Catalano, maybe. I saw Catalano towards the end of fall camp, I think spring ball, take some big strides, but in fall camp, I think he's continued that. Scanes might be the other. Cairo Scanes, since he's gotten first team reps the last couple of days at the field corner spot, with with Hallman not participating in 11 on 11 work, I think has been I think that's interesting just because, he's a freshman. Like, what do you expect? And I know he had an interception during one of the spring ball practices, but okay, well, it's spring ball, and not saying take anything against Cairo. It was a great diving interception, but you also have a group of, I think, Mike Tressel had said, I think he had said like one of the freshman quarterbacks was going to he thought it was going to make an impact. And that was a question. When he said that was one of the questions asked about which true freshman who enrolled early. And the only two who corners to do that were Jameer Scott and also Cairo Skanes. So I think that's a huge compliment for, Skanes for getting those first team field corner reps when Hallman's not playing. So those would be the guys I would say.
And in this kind of day and age of coaches, we can't develop as much as we used to. Yeah, I think the day and age where a guy can sit on the bench and become a starter as a redshirt junior are kind of gone. So it's nice to see that, these young guys are getting reps, are getting in, because if they don't, you might lose them. So it's good to hear that some of these kids are actually can contribute right away.
Absolutely.
Which is something we really didn't really have in the past because it was never really necessary.
I think that's the thing. Like you're seeing in Nick, we've seen Nick Herbig do it, but that's really hard for an outside linebacker to do.
Yeah.
Especially coming out of high school. But you've seen Nick Clayton put in, he put in the work of adding weight to his body, adding strength, and you combine it with his speed. He very well might be the most underrated type of pickup. Even though he was, I think by the end of the 25 class, he was a consensus 4-star if I'm not mistaken. But you see guys like that that could carve out a role. Eugene Hilton Jr., who he had a great catch today. And I've said this on another podcast where he popped out early during spring ball. You don't necessarily haven't seen like a big explosion during fall camp, but doesn't mean he's not contributing and he's not like making catches. But today he had a great catch where Daniel O'Neill threw up a ball that was hung a little too much. It was a free play anyways, but so he checked it down the field. Matthew Trainer, safety, comes underneath it and was just kind of sitting on it. Hilton just goes in front of him, leaps, snags it at the high point, and comes down with the reception. That's just something special, But you even seen happened with Dupree last year, Dylan Johnson, Kevin Haywood to an extent. But this year will be Emerson Mandel, where they need to get in, like at right guard. And we'll see just who else, other freshmen. I think, Catalano is one of those candidates, and we'll see if others can contribute on special teams. But yeah, this is very much like this day and age of developing. You got to get them up to speed. And that's why enrolling early is so also important nowadays. And it's become now it's become customary. It's common. It's almost now the precedent set compared to coming in late. I'm not saying that. Last year, 3 of the 4 freshmen that contributed, that I think burned their red shirt, came in summer. So it's not an exact science, but for some of those major type of position groups, like for the second year, it sets up huge. Because even Colin Cubberly too is another one of those guys. I was getting first team right guard reps last week during a practice. So, I think that the 24 and 25 classes too they're expected, and even we'll see what happens with the 26 class, but it is becoming where, hey, get ready, be a contributor. And I think some part of it too with I'm not exactly sure, but with the transfer portal too, it's like some of those guys can't wait. You can't really wait on those guys because, who knows, what's going to happen with the portal. And if they try to look elsewhere instead of trying to stay for another season.
You might as well get as much out of them as you can with I guess, the pessimistic outlook that you might only get him this fall. So I might as well get as many. If he can give me reps now, I got to take those reps now because I might not get next year. I think Xavier Lucas is a prime example of that, where you never know. But it's good to, because it always seemed like everyone around us, we'd hear about this freshman stud, this guy bursting onto the scene. And again, we never really, that wasn't Wisconsin's thing. And not that it was a bad thing to say that. It's like we're a development school, so we never really got that raw. We maybe find a diamond in the rough who, snuck not necessarily snuck his way into the starting lineup, but ended up contributing, and then you just realize, oh, this is like Sojourn Shelton. Like he's one guy that I can think of who started as a freshman. Right. Keanu Benton started as a freshman.
Jonathan Taylor and
Jonathan Taylor, and and it's in this day and age, I don't think we could. You got to get those guys, because you got to get those guys in now, or the chances are they're gonna feel unappreciated and they're gonna leave.
But I think the other point of it too is that if there are expectations, like linemen, go in, you got your body right, to compete, right? And I think it's also this communication where, you have some guys that are younger that need to put on a little bit more, body weight or get used to the college game. I mean, the biggest thing is like, you also don't want to put a kid that's not up to the speed of the college game. That's where special teams comes in. I remember Jim Leonard talking about that with Hunter Wohler back in 21, about how like towards the end of the season, you started seeing him pick up the speed of the game. And, special teams helps that way because you're going full throttle on like punt or kickoff, especially kickoff. And so that adjusts to the speed of you catch up with that speed of the game quicker. Now you don't want to put kids in danger either. So, but I think it's also just clear communication of like, here's what we have planned for you. You have to get these kids out on the field. And Luke Fickell talked about trying to get them ready, during the early signing period press conference in December, right? About how, like with enrolling early, like, it's also a chance for them to like, hey, they may be needed upon, be called upon in that regard. So yeah, but it's also just, I think it's communication. If something's going on, it's like, okay, well, it's talking about, the situations, what's going on. And I think the staff in that regard has been, can be good for that. But like I said, it's clear. You have to be clear with the communication. And if there are changes to certain things, you have to let the players know too, and let them make the best decision for themselves.
Awesome. Well, I've noticed that I've already kept you over an hour, but I can't end this without giving you a chance to talk a little bit about Badger Observer, which I am a subscriber to, and everyone else should be a subscriber as well.
Thank you, sir.
And, you're providing the great coverage that you've always done from your various stops along the way. But now that you are independent, are there things that you're looking forward to being able to cover or to do that maybe you weren't able to do when you were reporting to somebody else? Now you're your own boss. So what are you looking forward to, to bring to Wisconsin coverage that maybe you couldn't do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love it because it's also my mind works so many different ideas. And I do miss having someone being like, let's like take the 10 down to a 2. Cause like you're really like, I love being ambitious. It's one of those things that it sounds like a really terrible interview question, right? You're humble breaking. I'm just so ambitious. Oh, look at me. Oh, but one of the things that I want to do is go like for recruiting. And maybe I'll break it on this show. Like my goal is to go down, and I've got to book my tickets before it goes up even further tonight. Going down to Florida for August 22nd through the 24th, watch Jaden Petit take on one of the IMG teams. It's not one of the top 2 teams. I think it's the third one that competes within the state, but it's still a good matchup down in Naples. And then I'm driving across Alligator Alley and going to Fort Lauderdale to I got to figure out credentials. I'm trying to email the right people. It's been going back and forth, but then watch Ryan Hopkins and Matter Day take on St. Thomas Aquinas. Trying to do something like that where my goal is to try to get, like, I'm not going to Alabama. I can't go to Oregon, but my goal is to go to most of the games, but it's also being calculated and trying to see, like for the Michigan game, go watch Tayshaun Bardo in Elkhart, Indiana, drive up to Michigan, watch the game. I'll cover the game in Ann Arbor. And then the next day, Jack Janda plays on a Sunday. Okay. Well, you can justify the trip and the expenses by doing that. And so, so it's about being smart. It's about, for me though, it's like, I've covered recruiting ever since 2014. And for me, I think recruiting, even in the age of the transfer portal, especially on the offensive line, and this, like you have the great offensive lines. they're really cohesive, and it's hard to get from the portal and be cohesive that way. You can always do it early and then you just build them up and then they basically become like recruits anyways. But for me, it's really trying to get out and just try some things. And I think it's for recruiting. It's, even with me, like kind of a theme is I love doing I have a comm arts background, TV, radio, film from UW. It's trying to be creative and like setting up, like if it's a recruiting series, create a little teaser trailer that sets it up and I have an idea for it. I won't spoil it, but the idea is there. It's trying to I know we're talking football, but I did a double shot. I was in Platteville by 9 a.m. and by 4 p.m. I was down at the field house covering volleyball. And I want to I think part of that for those, I think volleyball coverage needs to be more because the volleyball program deserves it. And I think there's a avenue to really highlight players and staff. And I'm working on a few articles already for volleyball. But for me, it's really trying to, I love the thrill of figuring things out and calculating just what I can do and just be frugal about it and cost effective. And, I have to justify these costs. I can't just go down to Florida just to hang out down at Marco Island. I would love to. I lived in Cape Coral as a teenager. I would love to just do that, but I can't. It's got to be concise of, okay, I'm going to go cover this kid. I'm going to write about it. Maybe I can say hi to a couple of friends that I know down there. I'm going to stay with a couple of them down there, but the rest of it's work. And that's going to be, so you have to justify those costs there. So it's, a lot going on that end, but yeah, back to your part, it's just kind of like creating different projects and just trying to provide some unique, authentic, objective, content and features and articles and videos and I'm still figuring out what I want to do. And I think that's the fun part about it, where I'm saying I want to do 3 to 4 newsletters a week. It's probably going to be 5 because I have way too many things in my head and there's so much going on between volleyball and football and recruiting. May turn into 5 a week in terms of newsletters. So there's still a lot to come. And I think the biggest thing too is just making sure that it's still cost effective for people. Like right now, it's $50 a year, US dollars, that's for a yearly subscription through the 29th of August. And otherwise it's a flat $7 a month or $69 a year thereafter. And I'm sure I'll have holiday sales and whatnot too coming up, but I'm trying to be as cost effective as I can. Cause consumers, there's a lot of different outlets out there, but I think I'm going to provide unique stories, try and find the angles that others don't off the field, but also still cover the team, cover recruiting, and cover volleyball.
And that's, like I said, that's why I'm subscribing. And I've told you that it's like you go on Twitter and you see the same 8 people say the same thing. And what I've always appreciated with you writing is I can always see yours. You stand it. You got a little more. It's not as sterile, and you say you're trying to bring a little more personality, a little more of you into your reporting, and I think that's why I didn't subscribe day one because it wasn't payday yet. But
well, I appreciate
as soon as payday came around, I knew I would be there, and for sure, anyone who subscribes to the Dairy Raid should be checking you out for sure. And now I'm definitely well over an hour. And so I really appreciate you taking the time. Definitely, if we could find a time later in the year, it'd be great to do this again. I just realized we spent all this time talking. We didn't talk about Culver's, which is something I actually had in my notes. But
that's all good, brother. No, it's all good.
But next time for sure. But definitely appreciate you. And anytime you want to talk again, I'm all for it.
Hey man, and thank you. Thank you for you subscribing. Thank you for this opportunity to talk some Badgers football. Anytime you need me, man. And I'll tell you this on air, off air, just anytime you need me, man. Anytime you want to talk, I'm all ears.